Some of the most shocking emails in the Epstein files come from a man you've never heard of, with a job you've never heard of. Ramsey Elkholy was a mother agent, maybe still is, who, during the years he was most active, introduced Epstein to a lot of young models. And I use the term introduced lightly, because there are other words you could use, some which we might use throughout this episode, to describe just what the relationship between Ramsey, Epstein, and these young girls were. Now, I have been trying to speak to Ramsey directly, because unlike most of the people I have talked about on this show, he is not a global power broker or a billionaire or even a public figure. He's a private guy. But his emails are also shocking enough that it is incredibly important that we talk about it. And while I wasn't able to talk to Ramsey himself, I was able to get in touch with a model he once represented. And she helped to fill in some gaps for me and to round out a picture I was starting to form of who Ramsey is, which is, like many men I am finding in this industry, who genuinely seem to have no awareness of just what villains they are. And in fact, in the most egregious cases, they are people who genuinely see themselves as heroes.
We're giving them an opportunity in life to become someone.
And that cognitive dissonance is frightening, frankly. So let's dive into it. Ramsey Elkholy is an indie musician. He got his PhD in anthropology, studying the Orang Rimba people in Sumatra in Indonesia. And in the one interview he seems to have given in the last decade, that is where the biography of his career stops. He doesn't describe anything else.
I'm a lazy mofo. Like, I'm just so lazy.
That raises the question of how this man made money, because it's not your anthropology PhD and it's not your indie band, which admittedly gets about 100,000 streams a month on Spotify. Not bad, but not enough to afford the Brazilian modeling agency or Brazilian fashion magazine that Ramsey was interested in buying. So it seems that Ramsey's main source of income was as a mother agent, a job he did seemingly, according to his now defunct website, from 2008 to 2019. Interestingly, the same year that Epstein was arrested. And Epstein and Ramsey emailed regularly. And Ramsey's pretty upfront about why he's in this industry. Pussy. While describing his interest in buying, as I said, the Brazilian modeling agency, or this might have been about the fashion magazine. Either way, he says, my focus was on Brazil. Much cheaper shares and would get me the same results. Pussy. Subtle. And in general, he is more upfront than anyone else I've come across in the files about running a scheme with Epstein. When you are in New York, we could set something up, a casting or something, he says, while putting casting in air quotes. Bear in mind, this man is an agent. Now, we will talk about the difference between a mother agent and a normal agent because it is relevant. But for the purposes right now, he is an agent. His job, again, there's some caveats here, but is to get models castings. So it is very weird to be putting that in quotes. I mean, he's not setting them up for a real casting, which of course he knows and Epstein knows, and now of course we all know because it's made public in the Epstein files. But that is his job. Okay. We're at the very beginning. I can't get this worked up in the beginning. Redacted, he says, is also 23. Very hot blonde. We could set up a casting of some sort. More air quotes. I know 23 is on the old side for you, he adds. Ramsey is always scheming about the angle. What is the angle they're going to use to introduce the girls to Epstein? She's studying acting, so that was the angle, he writes at one point. University angle, ... he says simply. Better to have an angle. I'm not close with her, so I was trying to think of an angle. And one of their favorite angles is housing. Epstein owned several apartments in New York that he used as model housing. Housing for young girls, teenagers included, and we have in an entirely separate deposition we got from the bookkeeper of a modeling agency that Epstein kept propped up with a loan. We have testimony from her about how Epstein would go and party with these teenage girls at the model housing he had for them. But that housing was very convenient for Ramsey, who used it on several occasions as one of the potential angles for luring girls to Epstein. I was thinking maybe having a place for her to stay during her trips to New York would be a good angle since she won't have an apartment anymore. And it's worth noting that this actually isn't atypical in the modeling industry at large. Agencies often provide housing for the models. Now, the models have to pay for it. Part of the reason models often end up in debt to their agencies is because housing is just one of the laundry list of things that agencies help the girls with, but at a cost. But to hear Ramsey talk about it, you would think it's out of the goodness of Epstein's heart. She said she will move in with a friend of hers, so never mind. I meant to write you sooner, but I've been in Luxembourg all day at the US Embassy having some legal docs notarized. Ruslana's estate final accounting. I appreciate your offer, and I don't need to tell you that I also value your friendship. The reason I never ask for anything in return for introducing you to models is because I consider it more of a favor. And I know that also you're good for favors, as you have illustrated by letting blank stay with blank. You're a solid person, Jeffrey, and that means the world to me. Let me know when you want to see another girl or any of the other girls, and I'll set it up. Now you might think that the notable part of this email is, again, it illustrates that Epstein was having young girls stay at his apartments. You might think that it's illustrative of the point I made up top, which is that these men genuinely believe they're good people dealing with good people. The cognitive dissonance of a man praising another grown man for letting young teenage girls stay in his apartments, young teenage girls who the man knows the other man wants to be sleeping with. But actually, the point of this email is neither of those things. The point of this email is the mention of Ruslana's estate. Because as it turns out, Ramsey Elkholy was the manager and the mother agent for a young model named Ruslana, who died by apparent suicide jumping out of her Manhattan apartment when she was 20 years old, 2 years after she had flown virtually alone on Epstein's plane to his island. And the internet has long done what it does and conspiracy theorized about this link. Oh my God, this girl, this young, beautiful girl winds up dead 2 years after records show she flew on Epstein's plane. What does it mean? Could Epstein have had something to do with her death?
So what really happened to Ruslana? Stick around, fam. This heartbreaking mystery's got layers, and trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be questioning everything.
And the reality is, the link between Ruslana and Epstein was always thin. Beyond this moment in a flight log, there was no existing tether. But with the release of the files, what we can now see is that link is much, much stronger than anyone who had been doing the theorizing a few years ago ever realized. And it runs directly through Ramsey Elkholy, which we will get more into. But the other thing that is interesting to me about that email is that Ramsey is dealing with Ruslana's estate. He is the administrator for her estate, which speaks to the very particular kind of relationship he has with the models he represents. He's not a typical agent. Ramsey was a mother agent. Now, the mother of all mother agents, as far as I can tell, is a man named Tigran Khachatrian, who was a scout for many years for Donald Trump before then doing some scouting work, it appears, for Epstein himself. And when I talk about men who are villains, who really are out here thinking they are not just good men, but heroes, nobody comes close to Tigran.
I feel great when I help these young girls. Because over here, they don't have big opportunities.
So that why you got into this then, to help young women?
Yes. Yes, I do. I want to really help these young women, and it gives me great joy spiritually when somebody becomes very successful. I take great pride in it.
Okay. All right. I'm sure I'll catch up with you again in a little bit.
Tigran is the founder of Noah Model Management, a mother agency based out of Russia that was named after the biblical figure Noah. Because, as Tigran puts it, just as Noah was saving the animals, he's saving young girls. He's saving them by recruiting girls as young as 13 years old, taking them away from their families in Russia, Siberia, Eastern Europe, and sending them alone, effectively, all over the world, because he really wants to help them on a spiritual level. Now, luckily, Reggie Yates, who is the journalist conducting this particular conversation with Tigran, is not buying it, as you can see from his face.
Something tells me, though, it's not just about spiritual reward. This is business. Each teenage model that Tigran signs could make him thousands in commission.
And I would argue it's not just about business either. But the business piece is important, because the way that a mother agency makes money is slightly different from how an agency would make money. Mother agents are paid by the agencies with which they place the girls, which allows them to make lovely sounding claims like this one, which appeared on Ramsey Elkholy's now defunct website for many years. iManagement does not receive a commission from models for its services. Commissions are received directly from those agencies that models are placed with. And that is true and also sounds good, except where are the agencies they're placed with getting their commissions from? It's the models. And without getting into all of the decades of conversation and fights that have existed around the lack of transparency for models and their pay, the reality is all these motherfuckers are getting paid off the back of these young girls, but it is the mother agents who seem to have this lofty stance about their role. They're here to save the girls. They're the scouts, pulling them from the depths of Siberia to the heights of the fashion world, all while they don't even take money from the girls themselves.
How much money were you making at that age?
From 20 to 50,000 US per month.
That's a lot of money. You say it so flippantly, but that's a lot.
Yeah, but you have tickets, then flight per month. You don't understand what is the contract. You don't have a lawyer. All you have is 10%. So you're making a lot of money, but you never get them. Some girls, they don't know what to do, and they put themselves in troubles.
What sort of troubles, I mean?
They actually selling the girls for guys, just to hang out with these guys, and they pay to the bookers.
So random men would pay money to have young models just to hang out with them?
Yeah, of course. A lot of girls, they think that they are models, but then they become a prostitution,
How often does that sort of thing happen?
Well, some girls, because they're scared, because people say, I will not give you a passport, you will not go to your motherland, you have to make money and you have to find a way to make money. And it's the real reality of this fashion industry.
If you watch this show, this is not news to you. I've covered versions of this on multiple episodes at this point. But it brings me back to Epstein and Ramsey and their correspondences specifically. Because the wrongs that exist within the modeling industry, which is ground zero for a lot of sex trafficking, they exist on a spectrum. And I want to read you the 2 emails from Elkholy that I find the most troubling. And you can decide for yourself where we are in the gray zone, where we are on the spectrum of legality. I'm in Riga, Latvia, Elkholy writes. Amazing girls, many blondes with great bodies. Blank, redacted, emailed me saying you killed her with your words, calling her silly. She is alone this last week in New York and has lost money on this trip. She is desperate for cash. I have been working on her. She agreed with me that posing in lingerie is part of her job, and she told me she would have no problem to do that with you, but she doesn't have the courage to propose it herself. I know it doesn't seem like much, but it's a step. She plans on coming back to New York, so I'm thinking she could be an ongoing project. For me, it's a great experiment, taking a girl who hadn't been with a guy until she was 23 and getting her to this point. I think you're in a good position, etc., etc. She is sufficiently confused, and I think you can get some mileage out of this smiley face. Otherwise, hope all is well with you. We'll keep you updated on my travels. Estonia is next. I find this a pretty staggering thing to put in writing. And as a society, I think it is valuable that we draw a distinction between criminal sex trafficking and fucked up, perverted behavior. And I don't know exactly where that line is, or that legal line is. But I do want to break down some elements of this email. This is a grown man, probably in his 30s or 40s, talking to another grown man who's probably in his 50s or 60s, about how there is a young woman, I guess older than 23, though she can't be much older than 23 if Epstein's interested in her, who is financially desperate, therefore vulnerable and open to financial coercion, who is clearly quite innocent, hadn't been with a guy until she was 23, who is being told by somebody who is supposed to be guiding her career, because I assume that this is a client of Elkholy's. She's somebody who is in a position who is supposed to be looking out for her career, working on her, psychologically manipulating her, telling her, well, it's your job to pose in lingerie, which of course might be true, but it's certainly not true that posing in lingerie for Epstein is part of her job. That is certainly bordering on fraud and coercion, 2 parts of the definition for sex trafficking statutes. And yet, in this email, he's not describing what would amount to serious threats of harm or potential harm. You don't get the sense that he's saying, if you don't pose in lingerie, I will destroy you. It's a subtler psychological tactic. And I think it is a key part of why these men refuse to see themselves for what they are, refuse to see the damage they can do to these young girls, these impressionable young women, while they convince themselves that they are here giving them opportunities. And this brings us back to Ruslana Korshunova, the 20-year-old model who died by suicide 2 years after she flew on Epstein's private plane. Now, her mother maintains to this day that she thinks foul play was involved and this was not a suicide. This has fueled the rumors, the speculation that Epstein had something to do with her death. What is clearly true is that Ruslana was dealing with a lot in her life. Her boyfriend at the time was physically abusive towards her, something which we only know because it comes up in an email between Epstein and another young model. Epstein was apparently aware of this abusive boyfriend. And Epstein then uses Ruslana's name and invokes the abusive boyfriend as a cautionary tale as he ingratiates himself with other young girls. I knew her very well, Epstein writes at one point to another young model. She drove herself crazy, worrying, and took her own advice, and of her boyfriend, who knew little as well. She was great, smart, but lost and confused. She didn't have a father, and no one was strong with her. Her boyfriend was afraid she would gain weight and not be able to earn money. It was horrible. At another point, he says, 2 years ago, Ruslana, a Russian model, died mainly as a result of her boyfriend's belief in alternative medicine versus real medicine. And what's fascinating to me about this is good advice. On both of these occasions, Epstein was invoking Ruslana's name in order to advise other young models to make sure they were not just prioritizing their beauty, that they were prioritizing medical help as well. And yet it is in service, fundamentally, of, again, ingratiating themselves with young girls who are clearly not fully aware of or consenting to the dynamic at play, or else they wouldn't have to apply such psychological manipulation to make it happen. And I'm saying they because Ruslana was very much a shared person for Ramsey and Epstein. Ramsey was her mother agent. He was the one in Luxembourg closing out her estate. And they even talk about her with a degree of reverence. She would have been 23 years old yesterday, Epstein wrote to Elkholy with no context, nothing, but one day after Ruslana's birthday, 2 years after she had died. Yeah, I know, Ramsey responded, still very young. And yet, in the same email, the next line by Ramsey is, will you be in the city next week? Someone you should meet, smiley face. Who is she? Epstein asks. 18-year-old Russian college student I met at the Apple store. She's here for the summer, working at a restaurant in Six Flags theme park, and is looking to get out of New Jersey, looking for opportunities, etc. Would probably love to go to school in the US, I imagine. I think you will like her. And this is where my head fucking explodes, because there is just no sense of irony. It is the thing that makes me say these people genuinely think they're doing good. They're helping. They're giving her an opportunity. And the thing is, in some percentage of cases, that's probably true. There are some percentage of girls who are over the age of 18 who are aware of the dynamic fully and are consenting fully. But again, if in general it was a fully consensual situation, they wouldn't have to psychologically manipulate these girls and lie to them so damn often. And so, in the same breath that they memorialize and mourn a girl who was caught in a system that they are participants in, where everywhere she turned, somebody was predatory. She wrote in a blog months before she died, if I am for others, then who is for me? And then they immediately spin and turn to the next 18-year-old Russian girl who they are about to bring into the exact same system. As the final email that I will read here, Elkholy said, she asked me in the car about VS, Victoria's Secret, and wanted to know about your intentions, again with the air quotes. Of course, I said all the right things, that you're just being friendly, etc. I think it's important to talk to her about her career. Would also help me because I don't have a signed agreement with her. And then later in the email thread, he says, if I have something for her, like a meeting with someone at VS, then she will believe that last night's meeting was legit. Otherwise, I'm sure the guy has convinced her that my intentions were not good. They weren't, Ramsey. When you set your clients or potential clients up under the guise of a casting with an old man who you know is psychologically manipulating them to get into bed, your intentions are not good.